I already showed you my ID, officer. You fit the profile. Turn around. I'm a 4-star general in the United States Army. You are making a massive mistake. And I'm the King of England. Stop resisting before I put a hole in you. What Officer Miller didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly known, was that the man he was choking wasn't a shoplifter, wasn't a threat, wasn't anything Miller had decided he was. He was a man who had commanded 40,000 troops across the Middle East, a man who had spent 4 decades protecting this country. While Miller thought he was the hunter, 3 high-definition security cameras were silently recording every single second, every hand, every word, every frame of what was about to become the most watched footage in the state's history. In exactly 5 minutes, this officer's life would be over. Watch closely. Most people will disagree with what happens next. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here or yet to join us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The Galleria in Northern Virginia was doing what it always did on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Shoppers drifted between stores without any rush. Near the food court, the warm smell of fresh pretzels floated through the air, and somewhere nearby, a child laughed at something on a parent's phone. Elias Thorne had been retired for 3 years. 41 years of active duty. 4 stars on his shoulder by the end. Missions that would never appear in any public record. And now, at 63 years old, he spent most of his days doing the small, ordinary things that regular people never thought twice about. Today, it was a birthday gift. His granddaughter, Lily, was turning 7 next week, and Elias had spent an embarrassing amount of time across 3 different stores trying to find the right stuffed rabbit. Not just any rabbit. The one with the brown ears and the slightly crooked stitching that Lily had pointed to during her last visit and said, "That one, Grandpa. That one is special." He found it at the 3rd store, held it up, checked the stitching one final time, and smiled. Paid for it with cash at the register. The cashier, a young woman named Brianna, grinned and said, "Somebody's getting lucky this week." Elias thanked her and tucked the small bag under his arm. He wore an old gray hoodie, faded at the sleeves, khaki pants, white sneakers he'd owned for 2 years. Nothing about his appearance gave anything away. No uniform, no insignia, no sign whatsoever that this quiet, calm man had once sat in war rooms with the Secretary of Defense. Out here, he was just Elias. That's when he felt it. Not a sound, not a voice, just a shift in the energy around him. The kind of awareness that 40 years of military service had wired into his bones. The feeling that someone nearby was watching him. Not casually, deliberately, making a calculation. He turned his head slightly, the way someone glances at a storefront window. Officer Kevin Miller stood about 20 feet away, near the food court entrance. He was pretending to scan the crowd, but his eyes kept returning to the same spot. To Elias. Not once. Not twice. 3 times. Miller was 34, broad across the shoulders, a buzz cut and a restless aggression that didn't fit a man with only 6 years on the force. He'd transferred into this precinct 8 months earlier from a department 2 counties over. The reason for that transfer was buried in a personnel file nobody had bothered to read. Elias recognized what was happening, had seen it before, had lived it, more times than he cared to count. The fast calculation Miller was making, the kind that had nothing to do with evidence or reason. He took a slow breath and kept walking. Miller followed. He closed the gap in about 10 seconds, stepping directly into Elias's path with his shoulders squared. "Hold on a second, sir." Elias stopped, turned to face him. "Can I help you, officer?" Miller didn't answer the question. "I need to see some identification." Elias nodded. "Sure. I actually showed my ID to the mall security guard about 10 minutes ago, right near the front entrance." Miller didn't blink. I'm not mall security. Show me now. Elias reached toward his back pocket, slow, deliberate, keeping his hand completely visible. Miller's right hand dropped to his holster. Hold it right there. His voice went flat. Keep your hands where I can see them. Elias froze. His hand stopped midair. He hadn't even touched his pocket yet. 3 security cameras captured every single frame. And here's what makes this moment so important. Elias had already shown his ID, 10 minutes earlier, to a security guard, right at the entrance of this very mall. Miller had no reason to ask for it again. He asked anyway, "Have you ever been judged before you even had a chance to speak? Tell us your story in the comments. Because what happens to this man next is something no one should ever have to go through." Elias didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't let a single muscle in his face show what was happening inside his chest. He breathed, slow, controlled, in through the nose, 4 counts. Hold, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 6 counts. Tactical breathing, the same technique he had used before every high-stakes briefing, every dangerous operation, every moment where one wrong reaction could cost lives. Right now, it was keeping him alive in a very different way. "Officer," Elias said, his voice steady as a metronome, "my hands are up. I'm not reaching for anything. I just want to show you my ID. That's all I'm trying to do." Miller stepped closer, not a step forward, an invasion. He moved into Elias's personal space the way someone does when they want to send a message that has nothing to do with the law. His chest was almost touching Elias now. His eyes were hard. "Turn around," Miller said, hands on the wall. A woman with a stroller stopped nearby and watched. A teenager lowered his phone from his ear. The crowd around them was starting to notice something was wrong. Elias didn't turn around. Not because he was being difficult, because 40 years of reading rooms full of generals and diplomats had taught him one thing. In this moment, with this man, turning his back would be the most dangerous thing he could do. "I haven't done anything wrong, officer," Elias said. Calm, measured. The voice of a man who had once talked down armed insurgents through an interpreter overseas. Something flickered in Miller's eyes. Not fear, not doubt, irritation. The kind that comes when someone you expected to say yes tells you no. "I said turn around. I'm asking you to tell me what I'm being accused of." The crowd kept growing. Not a mob, just people who had stopped walking. People watching with growing unease, beginning to understand that what they were seeing wasn't normal. That's when a young man in a burgundy polo stepped forward. His name was Derek, 22 years old, working at the mall while finishing community college. He had seen Elias come in earlier, had spoken to him, actually, right near the entrance, right there when Elias had shown his ID to the security guard 10 minutes before. "Excuse me, officer," Derek said, raising both hands. "I know this man. He comes in here all the time. He already showed his ID when he..." Miller spun around so fast it made Derek stumble backward. "Are you interfering with a law enforcement officer?" Miller's voice boomed through the food court, loud enough for every single person nearby to hear. "Back up right now, or you're going in cuffs too." Derek's face went pale. He raised both hands higher and stepped back 3 times. He didn't say another word, but he didn't leave either. He stayed right there, watching, his hands trembling at his sides. The crowd murmured. Someone whispered something sharp. A phone camera rose into the air. Miller turned back to Elias. His breathing had changed, faster now, tighter. The calm he had walked in with was cracking apart, replaced by something that needed to win, something that needed to prove a point. He lunged. His hand closed around the front of Elias's hoodie and yanked him forward. Elias stumbled, not from weakness, but from the sudden, unexpected force of it. The movement was fast, violent. There was nothing in the law, nothing in any officer's training manual, that justified what Miller just did. Miller's fist connected with Elias's chest. Hard. The overhead camera, camera 3, mounted directly above, captured the strike in perfect 4K resolution. Every pixel, every frame, the full, unedited truth. You never saw the danger coming, and neither did he. Most people don't. Subscribe now, so you're never caught off guard by the very people who were supposed to protect you. Don't wait until it's too late. Elias went down. Not because Miller was stronger. At 63, Elias Thorne was in better physical shape than most men 20 years younger. But he didn't fight back. Not because he couldn't. Because he understood, with absolute clarity, that one defensive reflex, one instinctive swing, and Miller would have exactly the justification he needed to do something far worse. So Elias hit the cold marble floor and stayed there, hands flat against the ground, eyes forward, breathing controlled. Miller pressed his knee into Elias's back and pushed him flat. "Stop resisting," Miller shouted. But Elias wasn't resisting. He hadn't moved, hadn't struggled, hadn't done a single thing except lie exactly where Miller had thrown him. The words were for the crowd, for the cameras, for the version of events Miller was already building inside his own head. The story where Elias was the threat and Miller was the hero keeping everyone safe. 40 feet away, at a small table near the edge of the food court with a half-eaten sandwich in front of her, Elena Castillo watched everything unfold. She was 20 years old, a sophomore at George Mason University, studying criminal justice. She ate lunch at this exact table twice a week, had written papers on use of force laws, had studied constitutional protections in a classroom just last Thursday. None of it had prepared her for seeing it happen right in front of her eyes. Her hands were shaking when she picked up her phone, not from fear, from something sharper than fear. Something that burned like anger but felt heavier. She opened the live streaming app, pressed record, pointed the camera directly at the scene. The stream went live. 12 people watching within the first few seconds. 100 within 20 seconds. By the time 1 minute had passed, over 4,000 people were watching a man get pinned to the floor of a Virginia mall while an officer screamed commands he was already obeying. Elena didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The footage did all the talking. Miller didn't notice the live stream at first. He was locked in on Elias, on the control, on the authority. That's when the second patrol car pulled up outside the mall entrance. Officer Ray Vance stepped out, 31 years old, lean, dark hair, a face that always seemed to carry a low-grade worry about something. He and Miller had been partners for 14 months. He'd been on a break when the call came in about a disturbance at the Galleria. Something routine, dispatch had said. He walked in expecting a shoplifter, maybe a drunk causing a scene, something he could wrap up in 5 minutes. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. His partner, his friend, the guy he grabbed food with after long shifts, had a man pinned face down on the floor of a shopping mall. Dozens of people stood in stunned silence around them. A college student was live streaming the whole thing with her phone raised above the crowd. Vance's stomach dropped. "Miller." His voice came out tighter than he meant it to. "What's going on here?" Miller glanced up. A look passed between the two men, something Vance would replay in his mind for weeks. Miller's eyes carried one message: "Back me up." Before Vance could respond, Miller reached up with one hand and tapped his body camera, the small device clipped to his chest, and muttered something too quiet for anyone else to catch. Later, when someone asked, Miller would say the body cam had malfunctioned, that it had stopped recording right before the confrontation started. Nobody believed him, but at that moment, nobody knew he was lying yet. Elena shifted forward 3 steps to get a better angle on her phone. Miller finally noticed her. "Pause. Don't judge yet. If you were standing right where Elena was standing, phone in your hand, watching this happen 10 feet away, would you stay silent or would you speak up? Comment speak or silent. Because what you choose in that moment says more about you than you know." Miller finally pulled Elias up off the ground. Not gently. He grabbed him by the arm and yanked him to his feet, spinning him around in one rough motion. His other hand went straight to Elias's back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He held it up like a trophy, like he had just found something worth finding. He flipped it open and scanned through the cards fast. Cash, a driver's license, a health insurance card. Behind those, tucked against the leather, was a faded photograph. A little girl holding a stuffed rabbit, smiling wide at the camera. Miller kept going. His fingers stopped. Behind everything else sat a thick card. Gold embossing. The seal of the United States Department of Defense pressed into the top corner. 4 silver stars beside a single name. General Elias R. Thorne. Miller stared at it for a long moment. Then he laughed. Not a quiet laugh. Not a nervous one. A loud, sharp sound that carried across the food court and made several people in the crowd flinch. A general, huh? He held the card up toward the light, turning it so the gold lettering caught the overhead glow. That's one hell of a fake ID. That's another felony right there, pal. He tossed the wallet onto the floor. It skidded across the marble, scattering cards and photos. The picture of Lily landed face up, staring at the ceiling. Elias watched it happen. Said nothing. His expression stayed completely still. But something changed in the air. The crowd felt it. Elena felt it through her phone screen. Even Vance, standing a few feet away with his arms crossed and his jaw set tight, felt the full weight of what had just happened. Miller had just made the worst decision of his life. Sergeant Curtis Brooks walked in 3 minutes later. 52 years old, 26 years on the force, a stocky man with silver at his temples and a face that had seen enough bad situations to recognize one the second he stepped into a room. He'd been called in as backup, standard procedure when something drew a crowd this size at the Galleria. He wasn't expecting anything serious. Not on a Tuesday. He spotted Miller first. Saw the crowd standing still. Saw Elias with his hands visible at his sides, completely calm. Saw the wallet and cards scattered across the tile floor. Brooks walked over, looked down at the mess on the ground. His eyes found the gold card. He picked it up. His face changed. Not slowly, not with hesitation. It flipped the way a light switches off. 1 second, routine. The next second, something that could never be undone. Brooks looked from the card to Elias's face. Back to the card. Then to Miller. Miller. His voice dropped low. Almost a whisper. Step away from him. Right now. Sergeant, this guy was resisting. I had to. I said step away. Something in Brooks's tone went beyond rank. It carried the sound of a man who understood exactly how serious this was and knew every additional second was making it worse. But Miller didn't move. Something had locked inside him. A refusal to be the one who backed down in front of all these people. He had already committed. Walking away now meant admitting he had been wrong from the very beginning. Brooks stepped forward and reached for Miller's arm to pull him back. In the struggle, Miller's hand jerked sideways. His taser, clipped to his belt, discharged. The electric crack split the air like a gunshot. The bolt flew wide. It missed Elias by inches. It shot directly toward a woman standing at the edge of the crowd, holding a 5-year-old boy against her hip. The boy screamed. Be honest, was Miller right to assume that ID was fake? Or was he blinded by something he refused to see? Comment pride or procedure below, because this question matters more than you think. The moment that taser went off, everything changed. Not just for Miller, for everyone in that food court. The boy didn't get hit. The bolt had missed him by less than a foot. But the scream that came out of that child's mouth cut through every other sound in the room. Pure terror. And it brought the entire Galleria to a standstill. Mothers pulled their children closer. A man dropped his coffee cup. Someone shouted something that nobody could make out over the sharp, ringing, still echoing off the marble. Brooks grabbed Miller's arm and physically pulled him backward, away from Elias. "That's enough. Back off. Now." This time, Miller obeyed. Not out of respect, out of calculation. Because in the space of about 30 seconds, Kevin Miller understood exactly how badly he had destroyed his own life. The taser discharge changed everything. It turned this from an aggressive stop, something he might have been able to spin, reframe, explain away, into something that could never be walked back. A weapon had fired in a crowded mall, near a child, on camera, from multiple angles. His mind went cold and fast. The same place it always went when he had gotten into trouble before, when complaints had been filed, when questions had been asked. The place where the answer wasn't honesty. It was control. The security cameras. Miller's eyes moved. Not to Elias. Not to Brooks. They moved to the corridor at the far end of the food court, the narrow hallway that led to the back offices. The one where the security room was. He started walking. Not running. That would draw attention. Just a fast, purposeful walk, like a man heading somewhere he needed to be. Garrett Reyes had managed the Galleria for 11 years. 48 years old. A calm, steady man who understood exactly how much damage a bad day inside his mall could cause. He had been watching the entire confrontation from near the management office, had seen the taser go off, had seen Brooks intervene, had watched Miller's eyes move toward the security corridor. Garrett knew exactly where Miller was headed. He got there first. The security room sat at the end of a narrow hallway, a small, windowless space that most mall employees walked past without a second thought. Inside were 6 monitor screens, a central recording unit, and a cloud backup system that uploaded footage in real time to an off-site server. Garrett stepped inside, pulled the heavy door shut behind him, and locked it from the inside using the deadbolt that only managers had access to. He pulled out his phone and called corporate. His voice was steady. His hands were not. "I need you to flag all security footage from today, starting from noon. Do not allow anyone to access it or delete any part of it. This is urgent." Meanwhile, paramedics had arrived at the food court. 2 of them approached Elias, who was standing exactly where Brooks had left him, hands at his sides, breathing evenly, watching everything around him with calm, sharp eyes. "Sir, are you injured?" one of them asked. "I'm fine," Elias said. He wasn't entirely fine. His ribs ached from where Miller had slammed him to the ground. His wrist throbbed from where Miller had grabbed him. But he stood straight, kept his voice level, answered every question without showing a single crack. The paramedic, a woman named Clara, noticed the bruising already forming on his forearm. She asked to photograph it for documentation. Elias nodded. While Clara worked, Elias's eyes drifted toward the security corridor. Miller was standing at the door of the security room, pounding on it with his fist. "Open this door. This is a police matter. I need access to this footage right now." No answer from inside. Miller hit the door harder, then harder again. He pulled his baton from his belt and struck the door 3 times. Loud, metallic cracks that echoed through the hallway and made Clara look up from her work. Still nothing. And here's what Miller had no way of knowing. The security system at the Galleria was not owned by the mall itself. It was managed by a private firm called Sentinel Security Solutions, a company that provided surveillance infrastructure to over 200 commercial properties across the Mid-Atlantic region. Their footage was backed up to off-site servers in real time. No local officer could touch it, not without a federal court order. Elias Thorne sat on the board of directors of Sentinel Security Solutions. He had joined the board 2 years after retiring from the Army. Quiet work, consulting, the kind of role that kept his mind sharp without requiring a uniform. Every second of what had just been done to him was already safe on servers that Miller didn't even know existed. Miller struck the door one final time with his baton. The deadbolt clicked. The door swung open. Miller stepped forward and stopped cold, standing in the doorway, in full uniform, with a radio pressed to his ear and an expression that left absolutely no room for negotiation, was a Virginia State Police officer. Behind him stood two more. I'm pinning the most controversial comment on this video in the next 24 hours. So here is the real question. Should Miller go to prison? Or should he just lose his job? Drop your answer below. And if you have made it this far without subscribing, tell me in the comments what's holding you back. Because stories like this need to be heard. 3 days after the incident at the Galleria, Ray Vance couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, replaying the same moment over and over. The way Miller had looked at him in that food court. The way his eyes had said one word without his mouth moving a single time. Back me up. Vance hadn't backed him up, but he hadn't said anything either. Not yet. And in the world of law enforcement, silence was its own kind of loyalty. The department had moved fast. Faster than Vance expected. Within 48 hours, a statement had been released saying the incident was under internal review. Miller was placed on paid administrative leave, not suspended, not fired. Paid leave. The kind that sounded serious, but changed almost nothing about his daily life. The chief of police, a 57-year-old man named Gerald Pruitt, called Vance into his office on the third day. It was a small room on the second floor. Wood-paneled walls. A framed photo of Pruitt shaking hands with the mayor behind his desk. The blinds were half closed, casting the room in a dim, gray light. Pruitt didn't waste time. Sit down, Ray. Vance sat. I need you to think carefully about what you saw at that mall. Pruitt leaned back in his chair, folding his hands across his stomach. Kevin made a mistake. We all agree on that. But mistakes happen. The important thing is how we handle what comes next. Vance said nothing. The way you describe what happened in your official statement, that matters. A lot. You understand what I'm saying. Vance understood exactly what he was saying. Remember the story correctly. He left Pruitt's office without committing to anything. But the weight of that conversation followed him out the door and into his car and back to his apartment, where it sat on his chest like a stone. That night, Vance did something he had never done before in 6 years on the force. He went back to his personal vehicle, a black Honda Civic parked in his apartment lot, and pulled up the footage from his private dashcam. He kept one in his personal car as a habit. Had never thought much about it until now. He'd been driving to the Galleria when the call came in. The camera had been recording the entire time. It had captured the moment he walked through those doors and saw Miller on top of Elias. Saw the crowd. Saw Elena's phone. Vance watched it 3 times. Each time, his stomach dropped a little further. The next morning, Vance visited the district attorney's office. He didn't tell anyone at the department. Didn't call Miller. Didn't mention it to a single person. He was sitting in his car in the parking lot afterward, engine running, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He opened it. One line. Keep your mouth shut, or your badge isn't the only thing you'll lose. Vance looked up from his phone, scanned the parking lot. A black SUV sat 3 rows away, engine idling. He couldn't see the driver through the tinted glass. It stayed there for exactly 12 seconds. Then it pulled out and disappeared around the corner. Vance sat in his car for a long time after that, not moving. What he didn't know yet, what he wouldn't discover until a forensic team pulled Miller's phone 2 weeks later, was that Miller had a hidden folder on his device. Photos. 3 of them. 3 different men. 3 different days at the same mall. All taken without consent. All victims Miller had stopped, harassed, and let go without ever filing a report. Miller wasn't just a bad cop. He was a collector. Have you ever had to choose between your job and the truth? Between staying safe and doing what's right? Tell us in the comments, because Ray Vance was about to make the hardest choice of his life. And what he did next changed everything. The trial began on a Monday morning in a federal courthouse in Florida. Not Virginia, Florida. The case had been moved after the defense argued, successfully, that no fair jury could be assembled in the same state where the video had gone viral. The judge granted the motion. A small victory for Miller's legal team. It would be one of their last. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled. Every gallery spot taken. Camera crews lined the back wall, broadcasting live to feeds that were already pulling hundreds of thousands of viewers. Elias Thorne walked in at exactly 9:15. He wore his dress uniform. Full military dress. For stars on his shoulders. A chest covered in ribbons and medals that represented 41 years of service to a country he had bled for. The Distinguished Service Cross. The Legion of Merit. Decorations that most people in that room had never seen up close. The room went silent the moment he walked through the door. Not polite silence. The kind of silence that happens when a room full of strangers suddenly understands something they didn't understand 5 seconds before. The jury members, 12 people who had spent the last week hearing lawyers describe the incident in clinical terms, looked at the man in front of them and saw the full weight of what Miller had done. One woman on the jury pressed her hand to her mouth. A man in the second row whispered something to the person beside him. Elias didn't look at the jury. He walked to the prosecution's table, sat down, and folded his hands in front of him. Calm. Still. The same way he had been calm on the floor of that mall. The prosecution was led by an attorney named Patricia Okafor, 44 years old, sharp-featured, a voice that carried authority without ever needing to raise its volume. She had spent 15 years building cases against officers who abused their power, and she had won almost every single one. Miller's defense team tried their strategy early. During cross-examination of one of the mall witnesses, Miller's attorney, a tall man named Gregory Voss, paced in front of the jury box and painted a different version of events. He suggested that Elias had been uncooperative, that his military bearing had made Miller feel threatened, that a man of Elias's size and training could have been genuinely dangerous. Patricia shut it down quietly. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply played the security footage on the courtroom screen, angle after angle, and let the jury watch in silence. Then came the defense's biggest gamble. They called a witness to the stand. A man named Curtis Hale, 40 years old, clean-shaven, sat up straight when he took the oath. Curtis Hale told the jury he had been at the Galleria that day. Said he had seen Elias start the confrontation. Said Miller had tried to de-escalate. Patricia stood up. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice perfectly level. "What is your relationship to the defendant?" Hale hesitated for exactly 1 second too long. "He's my cousin," he admitted. The courtroom exhaled. The judge called for a recess 20 minutes later, not because of the cousin revelation, but because Patricia's team had just informed the court that a new piece of audio had been recovered. Audio that had been labeled lost during the initial investigation. When the court reconvened, Patricia pressed play. The speakers filled the room with Miller's voice, clear, unmistakable, laughing on a phone call with someone unidentified. One line cut through the silence like a blade. "I put that general right in his place." Was the general right to wear his uniform to court, or was that a power move designed to influence the jury? Comment uniform or civilian below, because this debate is exactly why cases like this matter. The digital forensics team arrived on day 4 of the trial. 2 experts from a private firm contracted by the prosecution, a man named Douglas Pratt and a woman named Kay Herrera. Both had spent over a decade recovering data that people believed was gone forever. Deleted files, wiped drives, overwritten recordings. If it had existed on a device at any point, they could find it. Miller's defense knew this testimony was coming. They had tried, twice, to have it excluded. The judge denied both motions. Douglas took the stand first. He was 46, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of calm, measured voice that made complex technical information sound simple. He explained to the jury exactly what had happened when Miller had tried to format the mall's security hard drive. Miller had entered the security room after the state police arrived and the initial chaos had settled. He had gained brief, unsupervised access to the system, about 90 seconds, before Garrett Reyes had returned and physically removed him from the room. 90 seconds. That's all Miller had needed. He had attempted to run a full format on the local drive, the one that stored the raw footage before it was uploaded to the cloud. He believed this would destroy the evidence permanently. It didn't. Douglas explained it simply. When a drive is formatted, the data isn't actually erased. The file labels are removed. The system stops recognizing the files as existing. But the information itself, every bit of it, remains on the physical drive until new data overwrites it in that exact location. The forensics team had recovered what they called a ghost file, a complete, unbroken recording from the night of the incident. Every second, every angle, everything Miller thought he had destroyed. The courtroom was absolutely still as the footage was played on the main screen. The jury had already seen the security camera footage from multiple angles. They had seen the assault, the taser discharge, Brooks pulling Miller away, all of it. But this recording showed something no one in that room had seen before. 45 seconds after the confrontation ended, after Brooks had intervened, after the paramedics had arrived, after the crowd had begun to scatter, Miller had walked back through the food court alone. The cameras caught him moving quickly, checking over his shoulder. He stopped near the spot where Elias had been pinned down. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small folding knife, and placed it on the ground, about 3 feet from where Elias had been lying. Then he walked away. He had planted it, a throwaway knife, placed near the scene, designed to support the story he had been building from the very first moment, that Elias had been armed, that Miller had felt threatened, that everything he did was justified. The jury stared at the screen in silence. Elias sat at the prosecution table and watched the footage without moving. His expression didn't change. But Kay Herrera, who had been watching him from the witness area, noticed his hands tighten against the edge of the table. Just once. Just barely. Miller's attorney, Gregory Voss, stood up from his chair halfway through the playback. "Your Honor," he said, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. "I need to speak with my client. Privately. Now." The judge granted a 10-minute recess. During that recess, Patricia's team received a call from the FBI. Miller's private cloud account, the one connected to his personal phone, had been turned over to federal investigators that morning. The department had handed over the credentials without telling Miller or his legal team. The account contained everything, including the folder Vance had discovered, the photos, the other victims, a digital trail that stretched back 2 years. He thought he could delete his sins. Most people who do what Miller did believe they can erase it all and start clean. Subscribe so you stay informed on how justice finds its way, even when powerful people try to bury it. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Not days, not weeks. 90 minutes. The shortest deliberation in the history of that federal courthouse for a case of this magnitude. 12 people walked into a room, looked at each other, and reached a decision that required almost no debate. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all 5 counts. Assault under color of authority, oppressive official conduct, civil rights violations, evidence tampering, conspiracy to obstruct justice. The clerk read each count aloud. The courtroom was so quiet that the rustle of papers sounded like thunder. Miller sat at the defense table with his hands flat on the surface in front of him. His face had gone completely blank. The kind of blank that happens when a person's mind has already left the room before their body does. Gregory Voss didn't move, didn't object, didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. The judge, a woman named Honorable Christine Alford, 60 years old, 28 years on the federal bench, looked down at Miller from her elevated seat and took a long, slow breath before she spoke. "Mr. Miller," she said, "you wore a badge. You took an oath to protect and serve the people of this country. What you did at that mall was not a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, deliberate abuse of the power that badge gave you. And you compounded it by lying, by planting evidence, and by trying to destroy the truth." She paused. "You will be sentenced in 3 weeks. But I want you to understand something right now. This court is not finished with you." Miller was led away from the table in handcuffs. The same brand of handcuffs he had used on Elias that day in the mall. The same cold steel. The same click of the ratchet. He didn't look at Elias as he was walked out. Elias didn't watch him go. Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting. Cameras, reporters, microphones pointed in every direction. Elias stepped out into the afternoon light, still in his dress uniform, and stopped at the top of the steps. He didn't have prepared remarks, didn't read from a statement. He simply stood there for a moment, looking out at the crowd of reporters and the people gathered behind them, and spoke. "I spent 40 years defending the rights of people I would never meet," he said. His voice was steady but carried something heavier than calm, something that sounded like disappointment. "Every single one of those years, I believed in what this country stood for. I still believe in it. But believing in something and watching it actually work, those are two very different things." He paused. "That badge is supposed to mean something. It's supposed to mean that the people wearing it are the ones keeping us safe. When someone like Miller wears it, it doesn't just hurt the people he hurts. It hurts every good officer who puts it on every single day and does the job the right way." 3 weeks later, at sentencing, Judge Alford handed down 8 years in a federal penitentiary. The courtroom erupted, not in cheers, but in a long, collective exhale. The sound of a room full of people who had been holding their breath for months finally letting it go. Outside the courthouse that evening, a woman approached Elias. Late 50s, tired eyes. She introduced herself quietly and said Miller had stopped her at the same mall 2 years before, had humiliated her in front of her teenage daughter for no reason. She took Elias's hand and held it for a long moment without saying another word. The city announced the settlement the following week. $10 million. Elias refused to keep a single penny. If this outcome felt like justice to you, tap like right now. Let's see how many people watching actually believe in accountability. Because what Elias did with that money next is the part of this story that changes everything. 6 months after the verdict, a new building opened on a quiet street in Northern Virginia. It wasn't large. A converted 2-story house with clean white paint and a small sign near the front door that read, "The Thorn Foundation, Police Accountability and Officer Training." Elias had taken every cent of the $10 million settlement and put it here. Not into a personal account, not into investments, into a program designed to do the one thing the system had failed to do for years: train officers the right way, hold them accountable when they failed, and give victims the legal support they needed to fight back. The opening ceremony was small. No politicians, no press conferences. Elias didn't want the attention. He stood near the back of the room in a simple dark suit, while Patricia Okafor gave a short speech about what the foundation would do and why it mattered. Elena Castillo was there. She had graduated early from George Mason, her criminal justice degree now carrying a weight it hadn't carried before. She shook Elias's hand at the reception afterward and told him the live stream from that day had been viewed over 40 million times. Elias nodded and thanked her quietly. Garrett Reyes was there too. He and Elena had both been honored with plaques at the Galleria the month before, small, brass markers mounted near the food court that read, "On this spot, ordinary people chose to stand for the truth." Garrett had cried when they unveiled his. He hadn't expected it, hadn't done what he did that day for recognition. He had just done what felt right in the moment. That was the hardest kind of courage, the kind that doesn't come with a plan. 2 months after the foundation opened, Miller gave his first interview from prison. It aired on a national network. He sat in a gray jumpsuit under harsh lighting and answered questions with the same flat, emotionless tone he had used in court. When the interviewer asked if he regretted what he had done, Miller was quiet for a long time. "I regret getting caught," he said. Not what he did. What he said was that he regretted getting caught. The clip spread across the country within hours. It became one of the most shared videos of the year. Not because it was shocking, because it confirmed what so many people already suspected, that men like Miller never truly change. They only learn to hide better. On Lily's 8th birthday, Elias drove to his daughter's house in Maryland and walked through the front door with a small wrapped box in his hands. Not the stuffed rabbit. That gift had been given months ago, long before the mall, long before any of it. Lily loved it, slept with it every night. This box was different. Small, wooden, with a tiny brass latch on the front. Lily opened it carefully, the way children do when they sense something important is happening. Inside was a locket. Silver. Simple. Elias had carried it with him for 11 years. Ever since the day he had received it back from the Army after his son, Marcus, was killed overseas while serving in a unit that Kevin Miller had once been assigned to before failing out. Lily lifted the locket out of the box and opened it. Inside was a photograph. A young man in uniform, smiling at the camera with the same calm, quiet confidence that Lily saw every time she looked at her grandfather. "Who is this?" she asked. Elias sat down beside her on the couch. He took a slow breath. "That's your uncle," he said, "and I'm going to tell you all about him. One last thing before this video ends. Remember the mall security guard from the very beginning of this story? The one Elias showed his ID to before Miller ever showed up? That guard's name was Andre, 26 years old. Quiet, attentive. He had recognized Elias the moment he walked in. Not from fame, not from the news. Because Elias had personally trained him. Andre was his protege, a young man Elias had been mentoring for 2 years, helping him build a career in security and law enforcement the right way. Elias had known Andre was working that shift, had shown his ID deliberately, had wanted Andre to see him there, to learn, even in a small moment, what it looked like to move through the world with dignity. He never expected it would become the most important moment of both their lives. A uniform is just cloth. It is the man inside that gives it power, or makes it a rag. Those were Elias's words. And after everything that happened at that mall, after everything that followed, they are the truest words in this entire story. If you were there that day, watching from the crowd, holding your phone, seeing everything unfold, would you have stayed silent, or would you have stood up? Comment yes if you would stand for the truth. Because the world doesn't change when good people watch. It changes when they act. He stood for this country for 40 years. Stand for him now. Subscribe. Share this story. And make sure the people you care about hear it too.
Hey there. Thank you so much for watching till the very end. We really appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And guess what? The story doesn't end here. Click on the video right here on your screen to dive into another fascinating story. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Once again, thanks for being a part of this amazing community. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring stories that move you.